The Mongol invasion of the Middle East wasn't a blind charge toward Baghdad. It was a calculated debate over rivers, routes, and supply lines. The Euphrates ran like a spinal cord through the Syrian desert, offering water, movement, and control. Baghdad, by contrast, was a jewel, symbolic, defiant, yet logistically exposed. The campaign's first gamble was choosing which mattered more. In early 1243, General Subutai received orders from Karakorum, a staggering 4,500 kilometers away. Ogdi Khan demanded not just conquest, but sustainability. Between Karakorum and Baghdad lay a wasteland. To reach the caliphate, the Mongols had to solve one question: follow the Euphrates with its towns, fortresses, and ferry points, or march straight through the desert toward Baghdad, gambling everything on speed. A story survives from the scouts of Subutai's vanguard. A unit tried to bypass a flooded segment of the river near Birsik, only to be stalled for 3 days. Camels broke legs in the mud. Officers argued about engineering crossings, while rations ran thin. It was a reminder: ignoring the river could paralyze the army. Let's pause here. The Mongol army, famed for mobility, depended entirely on animals: horses, oxen, camels. Water and fodder weren't luxuries, they were lifelines. The Euphrates wasn't just a river. It was the ixo-logistico of the entire Western March. But Baghdad wasn't merely a city. It was the intellectual and spiritual heart of the Islamic world, home of the Abbasid Caliph, whose legitimacy still resonated across Sunni lands. Capturing Baghdad meant declaring supremacy not only militarily, but ideologically. Still, the rivers made the rules. This is the tension Subutai faced. Option A: follow the river corridor, slower but secure, with fortresses like Al-Rahba controlling the flow. Option B: dash across the desert, faster but lethal if supply broke. Subutai chose the river. By spring, Mongol detachments fanned along the Euphrates banks, securing ferry points, building temporary bridges, and negotiating local surrenders. This decision would stretch the campaign, but preserve its power. It bought them the momentum that Baghdad would one day feel and fear. The Euphrates wasn't just a road to Baghdad. It was the campaign's bloodstream. And the Mongols knew no city falls if the army collapses before it arrives. Al-Rahba stood like a thorn between the Mongols and the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate. Perched on the eastern bank of the Euphrates, it wasn't the largest fortress, but it was the most inconvenient. It guarded the narrowest point of the river corridor and blocked access to ferry crossings vital to any further advance. The Mongol vanguard arrived first: scouts, horse archers, engineers. They weren't here for a drawn-out siege. Subutai wanted speed, and Al-Rahba was supposed to be a stepping stone. But the terrain betrayed them. The fortress sat on a slight rise, surrounded not by walls alone, but by a sea of dust and sharp stone. Mongol cavalry couldn't maneuver easily. Even worse, the defenders had scorched nearby fodder fields, denying the invaders' horses any forage. It was a passive defense, but effective. The Mongols faced a choice: encircle and starve the defenders, low risk but slow. Launch an assalto relampago, a lightning strike, risky but fast. The micro-history comes from a local scribe who watched from the city's edge. He wrote that, at dawn on the third day, the Mongols moved like smoke. Hidden behind dunes, they had crept close overnight. Scaling ladders rose in silence. Within minutes, the eastern tower was overrun. The defenders panicked. The gate didn't fall to siege, it fell to fear. Al-Rahba's fall wasn't inevitable. Its Garnikeo had numbers, provisions, and high walls. But the psychological edge, the Mongol reputation for ruthless precision, did more than the battering rams. The city chose panic over principle. After the breach, Subutai didn't destroy Al-Rahba. He stationed a rotating garrison, turned the fortress into a depot, and ordered engineers to reinforce the ferry lines. The river was no longer a barrier. It had become a bridge. But that decision cost him time. And time, in this campaign, meant Baghdad could prepare. Still, the Mongols had tested two things in Al-Rahba: their ability to adapt terrain into opportunity and the limits of Arab morale under sudden pressure. If one fortress fell this quickly, how would the others respond to the same message? Before catapults, before blood, the Mongols sent a letter. In the winter of 1243, as Subutai's army secured crossings along the Euphrates, messengers rode east, not to fight, but to frighten. Their mission: deliver the Mensajum Mongol, a pre-siege ultimatum, to Aleppo, Mosul, and even Baghdad. It was diplomacy sharpened to a blade. The letter's content survives in fragments, cited by Arab chroniclers. Submit, or your cities will vanish like dust. For leaders like the Emir of Aleppo, this wasn't news, it was prophecy. Cities farther east had resisted and burnt. In the Shaper, only bones had remained, and that memory marched faster than the Mongols. There's a story told in Bar Hebraeus's Chronicon Syriacum. When the letter reached Aleppo's court, the emir's advisors debated for 2 days. One imam said to burn it unread. A threat unacknowledged holds no power. But another, an elderly merchant, whispered, "Read it. At least we'll know what death looks like." The Mongol letter wasn't persuasion. It was calculation. They knew reputation was a weapon. No army could march ahead of itself, but fear could. The mere possibility of massacre, even if never written, made the letter heavier than arrows. 2 options lay before the recipient. Accept terms, pay tribute, offer hostages, avoid destruction, or refuse and become the next Neshaper. In Aleppo, fear won. The gates opened, provisions flowed to Mongol envoys, and the army turned south without striking a single blow. No arrows, no siege, just a signature of surrender written in silence. But this success had a cost. Cities that surrendered without resistance often lost internal legitimacy. Clerics called it cowardice. Soldiers felt humiliated. The people murmured. Still, for Subbatai and Ogdi, the logic was cold. A city surrendered was a city spared, and a supply hub earned. And so the letter kept moving, reaching Damascus, then Baghdad. The Mongol campaign wasn't just military. It was psychological, a war of nerves. And for every city that chose submission, the Mongols gained something more potent than territory: momentum. While Arab cities feared annihilation, the Crusader states saw opportunity. In the mid-1240s, Antioch and Tripoli had grown desperate. Their Latin Christian populations were isolated, supplies stretched thin, and reinforcements from Europe had slowed. When Mongol envoys arrived promising protection in exchange for access, many nobles saw a temporary salvation, not a future threat. The pact was simple: allow safe passage, offer supplies, and in return, the Mongols would bypass their lands, or even strike at mutual Muslim enemies. One chronicler in Tripoli, anonymous but likely from monastic order, noted that for once, the east wind brought hope, not death. The Latin barons called it a coalition of necessity. They framed it not as betrayal of fellow believers, but as a coalizio circumstantial against common foes. This wasn't pure folly, it was geopolitics under siege. The Crusaders faced option A, defy the Mongols and risk annihilation, or option B, support their advance in hopes of weakening the caliphate. They chose B, and in the short term, it worked. Mongol columns crossed northern Syria faster, fed and watered by Latin stores. In Antioch, port access allowed the Mongols to resupply, but no formal alliance was ever signed. The trust was always provisional. The logistics mattered more than the theology. Franqueamento logistico, the granting of supply access, turned into de facto allegiance. And with that, the Mongols gained terrain, intelligence, and passage, all without a single skirmish. The irony? A decade later, these same routes would bring the enemy back, this time to burn what they once spared. Crusader leaders had misread the Mongols. They assumed a temporary agreement could shape a lasting power balance. But for Hulagu's command, alliances were tools, not commitments. When the caliphate fell, the Latin states became the next item on the map. So the Crusaders, thinking short-term survival, handed the Mongols a bridge to their future conquest. By early 1258, the Mongol war machine reached the gates of Baghdad. Hulagu, brother of the great Khan, commanded a force of nearly 150,000 men, cavalry, engineers, siege masters. The Tigris River stood between them and the caliph's capital. But geography would not save the Abbasids. The Mongols didn't wait for spring. Under cover of fog and flood season, They launched a surprise crossing of the Tigris at night. Engineers built pontoons from local timber. Units were ferried in silence. By dawn, a full corps had established a beachhead on the western bank. Let's pause here. The Delta du Tigris wasn't just a tactical obstacle. It was a natural defense. Seasonal flooding created marshes and mudflats that should have slowed any siege. But Mongol precision turned that challenge into advantage. While defenders prepared for a frontal assault, Hulagu split his force and enveloped the city from the flanks. Inside Baghdad, the caliph faltered. Eyewitnesses recount his hesitations, missed opportunities, and reluctance to believe the city could fall. One commander begged to counterattack during the river crossing. Denied. Another suggested flooding the outer trenches. Too late. Resist to the end, risking the full wrath of Hulagu, or offer partial submission, hope for mercy. The caliph hesitated and lost both options. A letter was sent. No reply. Mongol trebuchets began their work. After 4 days, the outer wall crumbled. On day 5, the defenders retreated to the palace. Day 6, the Mongols entered. Witnesses speak of organized execution zones. Libraries burned. Scholars slaughtered. The caliph, once spiritual head of a vast empire, was rolled into a carpet and trampled. A symbolic execution that left no blood. Why such violence? Hulagu had debated sparing the city, but internal debate shifted after the caliph delayed surrender. The decision turned, not on military need, but on symbolic weight. Baghdad had to fall as a warning, and it worked. After Baghdad, resistance across Mesopotamia collapsed. But it leaves us with a question. If the Tigris was crossed in silence, and Baghdad fell in 6 days, what was truly destroyed? A city or a civilization's confidence?